Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Well, hello there, and welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast with Barbara Heidenreich, me, your host. I'm excited to have you back here. We're going to talk about data this week. The details are in the data. And I think at first when people hear data, the word data, they kind of think, boring. But honestly, it can be really fun and interesting and exciting. And what kind of inspired this topic for me this week was a recent consultation. Just finished up a week with one of my favorite zoos. And we really had a lot of fun observing an animal in particular whose behavior was really changing and dynamic. And it was really important for us to spend some time collecting data. And every time we watched that animal and collected information, something really new and fascinating was revealed to us the more we observed and the more we collected information. So don't be kind of fooled by the idea of, I've got to collect information. It can really be fun and interesting. So let's get into some details of why it's really important and helpful to collect data for animal training. There can be different reasons why we collect data. Now, obviously, I just kind of gave an example that might be helpful for developing a behavior intervention, but there's other reasons why we collect information. There's record keeping that helps us stay informed on the behavioral welfare and history of the animal, and we'll go into some details about what that information might be. And like I mentioned, it's really important for developing behavior intervention. So if we are seeing some behavior that we think, I don't know if we want the animal to continue emitting that behavioral response. Maybe there's something about that behavioral response that's telling us things are not quite right with the environment. We may need to develop a behavioral intervention, so maybe the animal doesn't emit that behavior anymore. And really collecting data helps us get information, helps us get better information, right? We're no longer making guesses. Maybe it's because of this. Maybe it's because he's with a male, or maybe it's because he's with a female. Maybe it's because he's in a new location. Maybe it's because it's summer. Maybe it's because there's a new person nearby. Maybe it's because he's young. Maybe it's because it's old. We tend to fall into these patterns of sort of grabbing at information based on maybe good guesses, but if we actually collect specific detailed information based on what we observe and what we see in the environment, and we'll get into some of the more details of what kind of information we might want to collect, then we're not just making educated guesses. We'll develop an intervention, or we'll develop a plan based on very specific information. And those details are going to be really detailed. And we'll start seeing those patterns emerge. Maybe we'll see a very specific discrimination that the animal's making that's evoking those responses, and it's getting very specific reinforcers for those responses. And that's going to help you make appropriate changes to get desired responses, or maybe avoid evoking responses that you don't like seeing. And then we can also collect data so that we get evidence that our behavior intervention works. So maybe we see a nice before and after, and that also is a good reminder that it's very important to take what I like to call baseline information, or maybe a baseline video, and we'll talk about also how to collect that data. I think another really important thing about this is it helps remove those personal biases that can be part of the process of working with animals. We all have our personal feelings that might be involved. And when we collect data, it can be more objective and a little bit less subjective. And again, that can lead to us developing better interventions. So remember, I said there's a lot of different reasons why we might collect information. And some of it may be just about keeping information about the basic history and health and welfare of the animal, behavioral health and welfare. And some of you may be familiar with the IAZA animal training guidelines that we recently developed and put out just in 2023, the earlier part of this year. And if you haven't yet taken a look at those, I will be sure to put a link in the episode notes so that you can find them. Those are freely available. And we do have a section in that document that is all about record keeping and data collection. In that section, we give you some great reasons why you might want to collect records and data. And I'm going to read some of those off to you right now. But again, you can go back to that document so you can have that permanent record of that information for yourself if you ever want to refer to them again. But here are some of the things that we put in that document. So there is a record of the process used to train a new behavior or address an undesired response. There's records that can be used to model to determine how to train the same or a similar species. So you've got something you can refer to if you need to, again, for working with another animal that may come into your collection. Data is available to review and evaluate to determine if your chosen intervention or training plan is producing desired outcomes. So that's what I was saying about having some sort of before and after records to compare to see if you're on the right track. And data collection and record keeping can encourage regular behavior monitoring. So that's a great way to say, where did we start and where are we now? Are we on the right track? Are we doing what we hope to accomplish with our animals in terms of managing their behavioral welfare? Data collection and record keeping can facilitate excellent communication among all your stakeholders about training and behavior. So this actually came up recently in a conversation I had with an animal care staff member who was new in a specific area working with some animals, and he just kind of wanted to see what had been done with the animals in the past. And there was some information saying this animal knew how to do a certain behavior, and he wanted to kind of resurrect that behavior, but there just wasn't some record keeping on that. So he didn't know how it was trained or what it looked like. So again, having records and data collection can be really helpful to maintain behaviors and keep them moving forward in the future. So I think a nice way to think about it is the record keeping is really for the animal. Even though it's communication amongst us, it helps make sure that all that information and all that work that was put into caring for that animal stays with the animal, so that those of us that are working with the animal in the future have all that information so we can keep everything moving forward for the animal's health and welfare. And actually, I got ahead of myself because that is the next point in our document here from IAZA. It says detailed information about the training and behavior of the individual is part of the animal's permanent record. This can provide continuity of care and optimal behavioral welfare when moving to other facilities. So look at that. I was reading my own mind. Training records can be useful when behavior change emerges over time. The historical record can provide information that can be important. And of course, records can be referred to for dissemination of information to other industry professionals. So this can be useful for things like journal articles, conference presentation, and of course, scientific studies. I think this is really significant. This is a really important reason for us to keep great data on what we're doing with our animals. And of course, a really important thing is how do we keep track of all this? And so we'll talk about different ways that you can record this information so that it's easily shared amongst industry professionals. We're going to take a little break to give you your first secret word, and the secret word is baseline. Secret words are important to remember and submit to show that you've listened to this podcast for your professional development. All right, back to the program. Now let's talk a little bit about what information you might want to collect. So when we're talking about behavior interventions, this might involve taking information about the specific focal behavior that you want to take a look at. So we might need some very specific information about what that behavior looks like, and that can take some description, right? We may want to measure this, so we might want to measure the duration of the behavior, maybe the frequency of the behavior, maybe the form of the behavior, like maybe how high the animal does it, what distance it does it. Those are specific details that depend on your focal behavior. We may want to talk about what conditions what are the conditions when the animal's doing the behavior. So that's the who, the what, the when, the where, and there can be lots more that you can add to that. The resulting consequences. And of course, there are many different outcomes animals get for doing behavior. This can include getting distance from something. It can include getting some sort of appetitive. And remember, one of my favorite things to talk about these days is nonlinear contingency analysis. That could mean that there's many different contingencies that are impacting the behavior, not just one ABC. If you're one of those folks that are familiar with the antecedent behavior consequence approach to, which is what we're talking about here, to analyzing behavior. But there's lots of ABCs, lots of different consequences, lots of different conditions which can impact a single focal behavior. So you may want to explore that as well. And again, in the show episode notes, I'll give you some links to some resources that can be helpful to you to help explore this information a little bit more. We have a resource called bigforanimals.com, which will help you get started identifying those conditions under which things occur, the focal behavior, the resulting consequences. And then, of course, that great book by Lang et al. On nonlinear contingency analysis, which will help you take a deeper dive into nonlinear contingency analysis. Now, for those general records, which I was referring to when I was reading off those 9 different great reasons to collect data from our EASA animal training guidelines, there are things like shaping plans that you might want to include in your records, maybe identifying your specific behavior goals and deadlines that you may want to meet to achieve those goals. And of course, I'm a big fan of taking video. Video is really important. So you may want video of your completed behaviors, what those look like, what the cues look like when you ask an animal to emit those behaviors, training logs, and what have been some undesired behaviors that the animals emitted, and what were the interventions used to address those undesired responses. There's also a really great resource in animaltrainingfundamentals.com called Identifying Behavior Goals and Documentation. And that's a great course that has examples of forms and documentation that you can use that I've just described there for those record keeping, if you want to check those out. And it kind of walks you through a process of setting up your whole training program and how you would use all those documents and kind of what order and sequence. So if you're a member of animaltrainingfundamentals.com, that is a really great course to basically get your program set up and your documentation set up. Now let's talk a little bit about what it looks like to take data, especially when you're looking at taking data for an intervention. One of the things that we really discovered in that example I was talking about a little bit earlier, that we were really getting all excited about collecting data, is that it was really important to take enough data. Sometimes we get a little isolated, like we think, I watched for 5 minutes, that's enough. What we found with this particular individual animal, that it was really important for us to take data several times a day because the animal's behavior was different at different times of the day. When we were initially working with the animal, we were around her habitat prior to guests entering the park. And when guests came in the park while we were still there, her posture really changed and it really impacted the particular target behaviors that we were looking at. So we realized that the way she was when guests were around versus when it was just staff members really changed the behavior that we were looking at. So that was really significant. So that impacted our intervention. So taking data on her behavior throughout the day became very important. And for another set of animals that we were looking at, we realized that different times a year are important because those particular individuals go into a reproductive mode that we're impacting their behavior. So we may start our intervention during a time of year when they're not reproductive because we're more likely to get the desired responses so that we can reinforce them. But as they start to go into breeding season, they may be more likely to do undesired responses as breeding season starts to kick in. And so we might have to change our intervention a little bit. So that means taking more data as things start to change. So different times a year, we're going to start collecting data again. So it's really important. Oh, and we also realized that different staff members had a different impact on the behavior. So these animals are making discriminations based on the staff members that are around. So it's important to take enough data, so to speak. So all of this to us, actually, instead of it being like, oh no, it was really like, oh wow, really fascinating. And it's also a reminder, like, let's say, for example, you have different people on the team that walk through the park at different times a day. They may observe something that somebody else doesn't see at a different time of day than when they walk through the park. So this is why the data collection is so important, to help get a bigger picture of what's going on in terms of the behavior that they're trying to impact. I think another really good example that we might be that's coming to mind for me is sometimes when we see animals showing repetitive behavior, maybe animals that are anticipating being fed, and maybe they're doing some repetitive behavior looking for a specific keeper that they know that might be coming. Maybe they're coming with food or something like that. And so that may happen at certain times of the day, but not at other times of the day. So that's one of those good behaviors to really look at throughout the day. We need to take different data so that we can really get more accurate information as to when it's happening, what conditions, maybe what people might the animals be, anticipating coming, that might be the ones associated with the reinforcers. So those are the kinds of things where we really can start narrowing in on what are the exact conditions that contribute towards when the behavior might occur, so we can get better at developing our intervention. Let's talk a little bit about how to take data for interventions. All right, I can't say it enough, but I love video. Video is my favorite way to collect data for intervention. There's just so many benefits to video. We can, of course, as I mentioned before, we really want to take baseline video, and that is one of those ones that is easy to forget because sometimes we're like, oh, I don't want to look at what I don't like seeing. I don't like seeing the undesired behavior. But it's really important to have that example of the undesired response if you can get that. Because of course, once you do your intervention, that baseline video of the undesired response, you're not going to see it anymore. So you really want to see what was happening before, and then afterwards, if your intervention was successful, you're not going to see that response anymore. So it's really nice to have that comparison of before and after. What I love about video is you can watch it over and over and over again. You will find you're going to see a lot more detail every single time you watch it. Much different than if you try to remember and recall what you wrote. And even when you write down stuff, you miss a lot of stuff. The other thing about video, it's objective. Unless you edit it in a way that's misleading, which does happen. I can tell you, it's very easy to edit a video to kind of have it tell a different story than what's actually going on there. But if you just have the raw data there, it can be really objective, and it's a permanent record, which I think is really fabulous. And of course, nowadays it's pretty convenient to collect video because we have smartphones, and you can put that information in the cloud. So theoretically, you're not going to run out of room to store that video. And what I find too is, maybe when you're recording it on your phone, the screen is a little tiny, but when you put it on a computer or a larger screen, you tend to see a lot more detail. And I've had moments where I was like, when I've gone back and watched a video on my computer and been really surprised at even more details that were revealed to me that gave me more information. So the next time that I was out there working with the animal, I was prepared for some things that we were going to have the team respond to that we didn't even see before, because maybe we were far away and maybe we had zoomed the camera in so that we weren't so close, so that we weren't impacting animal behavior. But by having the camera zooming in, that camera picked up some really important details. So video for me is just really my preferred way to collect information, even though you can write down stuff and it's it is helpful too. So I don't want to discourage people from writing down stuff. I think those things can be helpful too. And when it does come down to writing, we'll talk about some options for that too. The other thing I want to say about video is that if your presence as a human impacts the animal's behavior, remember, you can also put cameras on tripods and step away, or some facilities already have camera systems installed and you can just set them up to record without it being an interference whatsoever. So keep that in mind as well. We can also set up cameras without a human being on them, so to speak. So in terms of things that are more written based, or not so much about video, or you can use them in combination with video. You might consider the Zoo Monitor app, which was put out by Lincoln Park Zoo. And again, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. What I like about that program is it's a nice way to quantify your observations. And again, it can be used in combination with your videos. And you can set it up. You can really customize it to how you want it. So if you want to pick specific behaviors that you want to say, let's say we want to observe and see if the animal is emitting a specific behavior. If you want to test for duration or frequency or where it's happening in the environment, you can set that all up in the program so that you can measure those things. And so that's what's really nice about that program. And then you can have somebody go out there with a tablet or with their phone or with a computer, and they can watch for a certain amount of time, and then they can basically tap it into the program if those things were observed. And you can even do maps of the habitat so that you can kind of point to where on the habitat it happened. So there's lots of customization that's possible with that. And then it can graph it all for you. So it's a really cool way to get that into sort of a quantifiable format if you're doing observations that way. And then another resource for you is the constructional questionnaire developed by Israel Golddiamond. And that is in the back of the Nonlinear Contingency Analysis book by Lang et al. And that is a series of questions that also can help you think about what kind of things should you be looking for, what kind of behaviors, what kind of, and again, doing that nonlinear contingency analysis. And then it can also help you work towards an intervention. So again, that's something you can do with or without the video combination to help you understand what you want to look for, and again, how to get on a path towards an intervention. And this kind of leads us to our developing an intervention. And again, our Big for Animals resource, that's at bigforanimals.com, is a nice way to get started on that, as well as using the constructional questionnaire there to get you towards the nonlinear approach. And your data collection is really all about setting you up for an intervention if you are working towards addressing an undesired behavior, or even working towards building a new behavior or building some new repertoires. Time for your second secret word, and this secret word is questionnaire. All right, back to the program. So let's say you have a particular behavior goal that you would like to see the animals utilizing more spaces and elements on their habitat. So you could do a data collection where you are looking at how they utilize the space that they have available to them. And you can get sort of a before. You might use Zoo Monitor, you might use video to get an idea of just how they utilize their habitat. And then maybe you see that, there's certain parts of the habitat they're not really utilizing very much, and maybe they kind of stick to one space a little bit more than the others. And that can give you information just by doing data collection. And then you can develop a strategy, a plan, we might call it an intervention if you want, to develop ways that you might get them engaged with more parts of their habitat. You might make that sort of more throughout the day so that it's happening all throughout the day. And then you would do some data collection after you start implementing your strategy to see if it was successful, right? So that's a great way to use data collection to help measure how well was your strategy working? Did it actually have an impact? And that way it's more objective, right, than subjective. Instead of saying, well, I think it's kind of working, you can actually say it actually worked. We have evidence, we have measured, and we can see that the animal, by our data collection, is actually utilizing these spaces more. And again, as I said, the Zoo Monitor app, you can have a little map of your habitat, so you can actually see for sure if the animal's getting out into those other spaces. So where might you enter your data? So a lot of zoos do have information systems where they enter data. Some of them have some really incredible, fancy ways that you can customize stuff. Animal care software is one that's like an app-based system where you can enter data through the computer. You can do it through your phone. You can do it through a tablet. There's all kinds of ways. It's very customizable. So that's kind of a cool one as well that you might want to check out. And again, as I mentioned, I have the course on identifying program goals and documentation that can give you some ideas of documents that you could use and then of course you can enter those into the systems that you already have going. I again will put links to all these resources that I mentioned in our episode notes here. But that is just a very brief, quick introduction to some data collection and ways that you might use it to help you manage your animal behavior, how it can benefit you, how it can help you with an intervention, how it can help you keep track of the animal's behavioral welfare and keep things going as far as your training and behavior. And again, check out those resources because that will really help you add some structure and organization to all your data collection and record keeping. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that one and I hope you will find it useful for your animal training. And thank you again for joining me for an episode of Animal Training Fundamentals with Barbara Heidenreich. See you next time. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.